So good evening, everyone. Okay, I'll try that one again. Good evening, everyone. All right, thank you. A huge welcome to all of you. It's just absolutely amazing. This is the 25th anniversary of the Advanced Technological Education Program at NSF. You are all awardees, yes. And this is the largest PI conference that we've had. There are more than 900 people attending this conference this year. So yes, another round of applause. So welcome. I think we've got a great program going. I want to, first of all, I always like to start with the students, because ultimately we're here because of the students. So I wanted to acknowledge the fact that I think we have at least 62 students attending the conference this year, maybe 64, because there were a couple of extras that were added at the last minute. So welcome to the students, and we're really glad you're here. Okay, the second piece to acknowledge is there's a steering committee that forms every year, actually not too long after this conference ends, and AACC is responsible for that. Ellen Hawes gets all of us going, and by January, we're up and running, planning for the next PI conference. So the steering committee does a lot of work. You can thank them for our plenary speaker, and the other speakers, a lot of the sessions that were organized, a lot of the things that you will experience in these next kind of 2 days are really due to what the steering committee has done in partnership with NSF. The program officers participate, as well as our partner, the American Association of Community Colleges. So I really want to acknowledge everybody who partners on this program. So give everybody a round of applause. So one other thing is there are evaluations that you all are asked to fill out each year about this conference, and we take your responses seriously, okay? So one of the first meetings that we have with Ellen Hawes is just to go over what did people say about the sessions and what they thought about the conference. So there's a few changes this year. So for people who have not attended, this is going to seem normal, but normally we have 3 showcases. There's a Wednesday night, a Thursday, and a Friday. Based on comments on the evaluations you filled out last year, we are not going to have 3 showcases. There's only going to be 2, okay? So if you like it or don't like it, let us know, right? We will take that into account. Another thing is we had always interwoven the students into the showcases, and we want to highlight them, so they're actually going to have their own special poster session. So be sure you go by and ask them really good questions, all right? Because I think they'll be able to answer them. And basically what we've done on Friday, when that last showcase would have been, is to add more content. So there's some of the other sort of almost birds of a feather get together, bring different groups together. So check those out and take advantage of that. I want to hold this card up, okay? Hopefully you guys, they were on the seats. This is a sort of a, well, what would you call it? It's for a prize drawing. And if you look at the back, you want to go find the booths and get half stamped, okay? What will you get if you win the prize? You will get an ATE at 25 STEM guitar. Yeah, I know. I'm like, what about NSF program officers? Can't we fill this out too? And it's a guitar that was worked on by students, by teachers, and by faculty. So this was truly a labor of love, and a lot of people put hands-on this guitar. So make sure you take this and you fill it out and visit those booths. So I want to be sure and get that across. And at this point in time, I would like to introduce Dr. George Boggs, who is the CEO Emeritus of the American Association of Community Colleges and Superintendent and President Emeritus of Palomar College in San Marcos, California. Yeah. I think I can probably safely say you flunked retirement, right? right? Because he's still very, very active and does a lot of things. And I want to just add one thing that I think all of you will resonate with. Dr. Boggs led the Vision Task Force at Palomar College that produced the 1991 Vision Statement that started the Learning Colleges movement. So what does that mean to all of us? Remember when all of a sudden you had to think about learning outcomes and how you would measure them in your courses? We can thank Dr. Boggs. So with that, let me turn it over to Dr. Boggs.
Well, thank you, Dr. Carter. And on behalf of AACC, I welcome you to the ATE conference. The Advanced Technological Education Program has transformed the education of technicians in our country. Our success is due to the persistence of early advocates who made the case for the role of America's community colleges in the preparation of technicians, visionary policymakers who shepherded the authorizing legislation, NSF leaders who turned the Scientific and Advanced Technology Act of 1992 into ATE, and the educators at community colleges and four-year institutions, and the industry leaders who develop the programs and make them work. We have created a culture that supports, strengthens, and sustains STEM technician education programs and grows and nurtures STEM leaders. NSF has documented that ATE programs encourage students to enroll in mathematics and science courses that prepare them for rewarding careers in advanced technology fields, deliver highly skilled technicians to the workforce in strategic technical fields that drive the U.S. economy, improve STEM curricula and instruction at community colleges and secondary schools, and reach out to middle school and high school students to inform them of technical career opportunities. ATE programs have also been effective in including women and students of color and attracting them to STEM programs that are important for our nation's economic competitiveness. On behalf of AACC, I want to thank all of you who continue to work to make the ATE program so successful. Community college STEM leaders and their partners from industry, four-year colleges and universities, and K through 12, and congratulations to the students who are here with us tonight. The success of the ATE program should be celebrated, but there is more work to be done to improve partnerships, to strengthen and expand our programs, and to remove barriers for students. May our next 25 years be marked by continued progress. In honor of the 25th anniversary of the NSF ATE program, and in recognition of the commitment and work that NSF program directors do on behalf of the nation's community colleges, we would like to invite them to join us on the stage as I call them up, and we would like them to remain on the stage for a group photograph. First of all, I'd like to call up the founding program directors, Dr. Elizabeth Tellis and Dr. Gerhard Salinger, and thank them for their leadership. Dr. Duncan McBride, and thank you for your tireless support and leadership. And Dr. David Campbell. David, will you join us? Just a few words about David here. As program director at NSF since 2001, David Campbell was a steadfast advocate for community colleges and an ardent appreciator of community college faculty. As co-lead of the ATE program, he helped to craft the ATE program solicitation to encourage initiatives that reached out to veterans and underrepresented populations and cross-disciplines to respond to emerging technologies and workforce needs. Dr. Campbell would always make time to discuss ideas for current and future work with his PIs. Though he preferred to work quietly and behind the scenes, he is well known for his sense of humor, his calm demeanor, and his deep content knowledge and commitment to the ATE program. Please join me once again in congratulating Dr. Campbell on his retirement from NSF and in thanking him for his service to the program and to the nation's community colleges. To continue, I would like to invite Dr. Corby Hovis and Dr. Connie Della Piana to the stage, and thank you both for your years of dedicated service to NSF ATE. I would also like to invite the following NSF program directors to the stage: Dr. Stephanie August, Dr. Tom Higgins, Dr. Andrea Johnson, Dr. Rupa Iyer, Dr. Pushpa Ramakrishna, Dr. Heather Watson. And finally, we would like to particularly acknowledge Dr. Celeste Carter for her tireless leadership and commitment to NSF's ATE program. Under her guidance, the ATE program has added funding tracks that have facilitated cross-discipline initiatives and encouraged the involvement of faculty from rural and minority-serving institutions. Her encouragement of faculty stems from her own experience as a successful ATE principal investigator who did not give up when her first proposal was not funded. I can see some of you may relate to that. Her observations as a program officer at the NSF and her appreciation of community college educators' expertise has made her an advocate of ATE collaborations with other STEM workforce initiatives. Dr. Carter's deep commitment to working with grantees and their institutions has encouraged hundreds of new and innovative programs across the nation, countless industry education partnerships, and thousands of new technicians eager to strengthen and drive forward America's technical workforce. Thank you, Celeste. We also know that there are several members of the NSF ATE community who have served as NSF rotators, lending their time and talents to NSF ATE before going back to their community colleges. Would those of you who previously served as NSF rotators please stand? Thank you for your work. Let's offer one more round of applause for all of these directors and rotators who worked to make ATE program the success that it is. Please welcome back to the stage Dr. Celeste Carter.
Got my notes still. So it's also a great pleasure to introduce from the National Science Foundation, Dr. Fleming Krim. He is the Chief Operating Officer at the Foundation, and he is also the John E. Willard and Hilldale Professor of Chemistry Emeritus at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He also is a returnee to the National Science Foundation. So hopefully you're going to kind of see that as that people, once we get there, right, we tend to really like it and come back. So he led the Directorate for Mathematical and Physical Sciences of the National Science Foundation, and in July of 2018 came back to be the Chief Operating Officer. So I would like to invite Dr. Krim up to the stage to give a welcome from the National Science Foundation.
Well, I have to tell you, my heart just wells up with joy to see all of the former and current NSF program officers recognized by this group. I have, since I've come back to NSF, encountered the ATE program again and again, and it is a program that is having a moment because it is so important to the nation. So, good evening and welcome to Washington, D.C. And congratulations to the ATE Principal Investigators Conference on 25 years of leading development and preparation of America's technological workforce. The director of the foundation, France Cordova, who is in Berlin leading the U.S. delegation to the Arctic Ministerial Conference, sends her warm greetings and would be here if it didn't involve a transatlantic flight and a time machine. We're all here this week because we know the immense value and importance of the scientific workforce. As the place where discoveries begin, NSF's founding mission has been to promote and advance the progress of science. From Google and MRIs to smartphone technology and LIGO, NSF has witnessed many transformative breakthroughs in science and engineering. We've also learned that a strong, skilled technical workforce is integral to innovation. And from the beginning, NSF has known how important strengthening the nation's collective scientific enterprise is to sparking discovery. Our commitment to funding basic research and broadening participation in STEM education has helped increase productivity, educate the next generation of scientists and engineers, and benefit our nation's health, security, and competitiveness. We're happy to have partners in this mission like AACC. Earlier this summer, NSF worked with AACC on the 4th Annual Community College Innovation Challenge. This is a remarkable activity in which you see students doing very interesting things. We celebrated it at the White House. This activity shows the creative possibilities that transpire when we commit to support STEM education across the spectrum. Now, these kind of possibilities are why programs like ATE exist to support innovative approaches. I want to make a few comments about ATE, and this is coals to Newcastle because you know what I'm about to say, I think. But educating these highly skilled technicians for the industries that drive the economy is tremendously important to our nation. For a quarter of a century, ATE has helped form partnerships between academic institutions and industry to promote improvement in the education of science and engineering technicians at the undergraduate and secondary school levels. The number of jobs requiring substantial STEM expertise has grown nearly 34% over the past decade. According to the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, the NSF statistics arm, there are 6.7 million U.S. workers in science and engineering jobs. But 19.4 million workers use S&E technical expertise in the workplace. In the next 10 years, America will have over 1 million jobs unfilled because of the rapidly changing technologies and the impact of automation. Now, these numbers show why a STEM-literate public is crucial to our nation's productivity and why STEM education is one of our priorities at NSF. So, let's think about the future for a moment. How do we train people today to be ready for these jobs when we don't know what those jobs will be? I'm very fond of the Yogi Berra, it may be perhaps apocryphal, but the Yogi Berra quote that says, "It's very hard to make predictions, especially about the future." Now, if you look at that quote on Google, you will find that that's been assigned to Groucho Marx and Freeman Dyson and Niels Bohr and a lot of people, okay? But it's a sentiment I think we can all embrace. So, faced with that, What are our challenges to answering the question about how we train people to be ready for those jobs? How do we look over the horizon to see what they're going to be? Now, although the needs differ across industries, there are important similarities. Industries need a workforce that's data literate, able to deal with complexity, and able to communicate. Even without considering those workforce changes on the horizon, we do know that today's technical workforce needs reskilling and ongoing education. We had an event at NSF recently in which leaders of industry came to tell us how important reskilling and updating their technical workforce was. And in fact, ATE played a very important part in that discussion. We also know that by bringing industry and higher education together, we can identify the knowledge and skills necessary for these rapidly changing workplaces. So this is why NSF began addressing the need for technical reskilling 25 years ago with ATE. You have helped us learn the strategies that work to reach students and educate them to be work-ready on the first day of their jobs. Now, this interest is not limited to NSF, it's not limited to folks like you. It also is being seen more broadly. The National Science Board, the policy board for the National Science Foundation, has created a task force on the skilled technical workforce. This group works to identify the opportunities and challenges facing those involved in shaping the skilled technical workforce. They have visited a few of your institutions, and the message they come back with is one of inspiration. They are so impressed with the sort of things that are going on. That group is going to recommend strategies to the National Science Board and the National Science Foundation to even more vigorously pursue these goals. So it goes beyond just NSF, it includes the National Science Board, but it actually reaches much further. The administration also recognizes the importance of the American worker. Celeste and I attended the first meeting of the White House President's National Council for the American Worker. Our director sits on that council and is the only scientific research agency head that is sitting on the Council for the American Worker, in part because we have programs like yours. Earlier this month, the director was in Japan at the Science and Technology Society Forum, where she described ATE to a global audience as critical to building the workforce of the future. She shared with them what NSF has always known: advancing the progress of science requires investing in people. So let me close by coming back to the characteristics of ATE again. With over $1 billion in funding over 490 institutions, with over 65% of the awards going to two-year degree-granting institutions, ATE is one of NSSF's investments that produces results. Another priority for the National Science Foundation is to increase the participation of underrepresented minorities in STEM. And again, ATE is a vehicle for doing that, giving opportunities to millions of students and helping our nation, giving them the chance to help our nation to remain the exemplar of global innovation. Your commendable achievements are really worth celebrating, and we look forward to the next 25 years. Thank you, congratulations, and welcome.
Okay, another great opportunity for me is to introduce our plenary speaker for the evening, Dr. Christine Darden. She is a mathematician, a data analyst, an aeronautical engineer who devoted much of her 40-year career in aerodynamics at NASA to researching supersonic flight and sonic booms. But how many of you saw the movie Hidden Figures? Most of us, right? Pretty amazing movie. So Christine Darden is often asked which movie star played her in the motion picture Hidden Figures. She goes, or her reply was at one meeting, "I am not in the movie, but I am in the book." So how many of us have read the book? I haven't, and I think I'm going to go get it and read it. So I wanted to add that because I know you have a brief bio of Dr. Darden in the book. I also wanted to say that one of her reply when asked about the movie was, she said, "Well, when Hollywood called, they said they had to have it tight to keep it interesting, so they left me out." So it's just a tremendous pleasure to welcome Dr. Darden to the ATEPI conference and recognize all of her achievements, and I really look forward to the comments that you have to make.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you and good evening to everyone. I am certainly pleased to be here. I must admit I had never heard of the ATE program until I was called, but I have been extremely impressed when I have read about it and read about the program that's going on. And so I entirely support all of the work that has been done for 25 years and the work that is continuing to go on. So I commend you for all that you've done. For the last 2 years, I've done a lot of speaking about lessons one could garner from the movie Hidden Figures. And one that really resonated with me was when Dorothy Vaughan saw the big empty room as she was walking to her supervisor's office. And she said, "What did you tell me was going in that room over there?" And her supervisor says, "Well, it's something called an IBM." She said, "And it's going to be able to calculate a lot faster than you all do." And Dorothy thought, she says, "Well, that's good for NASA, but it's not very good for us." So the next time you see Dorothy, she's at the public library. She is looking for a book on Fortran programming. And she went back and taught herself to code. She not only taught herself to code, she taught all of the other ladies in her office to code so that they would not lose their jobs, because that's exactly where they were headed. And the upshot of that was when they found out how good Dorothy was and they asked to transfer her, she says, "I'm not going to transfer to the computer area unless all my ladies go with me." And so she carried everybody with her. And when I got to NASA, Dorothy was the Fortran Consultant of the Year. She had an office in the front of the computer building, and she was there to help anybody on the whole entire field complete their Fortran codes if they couldn't get them to run. So she had done a marvelous job. But that story really impressed me, and I always tell students, you need to look at what's happening to the jobs in our country. What jobs are prospectively growing, or what jobs may be going away. And I have often told them about manufacturing jobs where, of course, a lot of them went overseas. Those that have come back now and are working and are very productive, but they have robots doing a lot of the repetitive work. And I said, so whereas you might have been doing some of that repetitive work where you worked in the manufacturing companies before, now maybe you need to know how to build or program or repair that robot. So you need some higher level skills. And I know you all seem to be approaching a much broader range of the skills and everything, but certainly I think those are the kind of issues that the entire country should be thinking about. In fact, I saw a couple of secretaries leave during my early years at NASA because they couldn't make the adjustment from a typewriter to a computer to type our reports and things at the center. Now let me tell you a little bit about how I ended up at NASA. And I'll start with some of the things I enjoyed as a child. I'm from North Carolina, right outside Charlotte. It's a very small town. It's grown a lot since Charlotte has grown. But I was a curious child. Mom said she gave me a talking doll when I was 5 years old. And I had never seen a talking doll. But she said I didn't play with that doll very much. I cut her open to find out why she talked. So I think that was sort of an indication maybe of what I liked. But I also helped my dad with his car, and I fixed my bicycle brakes with a coat hanger. So I had some indication of my interest. I went to school in Monroe, to a school that was right across the street from my house, 1st through 12th grade school. And in the 10th grade, I took algebra. I did fine in algebra, but I didn't rave over it or anything. In the 11th grade, my parents sent me to Asheville, North Carolina, to a boarding school. And the only math class they had there that I could take was geometry. I took geometry. I fell in love with geometry. I loved the teacher. I just really loved that class, and I did very well in that class. And I believe that one of the reasons I loved that class, because in geometry, I could at least see some of the relationship between those mathematical equations and diagrams and the real world. And I think that was something that fell in love, that actually impacted my decision. But because I enjoyed geometry so very much, I decided then I wanted to be a mathematician. And so I came to Virginia to go to college. I didn't want to go west because my older sisters and brothers had gone that way, so none of us had been to Virginia. So I came to Hampton, Virginia to go to school, not really thinking about the fact that the highest level of math that I had had was plain geometry. And students from Washington, D.C., and Richmond, and Norfolk, and those areas had calculus and trig and everything. And I said, well, I will just have to learn where I am and start where I am and learn. And then, shortly then, my father called me, and he said, Christine, this is 1958. He said, I don't think there are that many jobs for an African-American mathematician right now. I think you should get a teacher's certificate so you can be assured of getting a job when you finish college. So that kind of messed up my thoughts a little bit. Because I was going to have to take 30 hours of education. There would be less math, but 30 more hours of education I would have to take. And I had read or heard about this formula. Maybe my parents had talked to me about it, p to the 4th power. And that's kind of what that title means that you see. P to the 4th power. It stood for perceive of yourself in a job that you think you'd really like to have. And I had perceived of myself as being a mathematician. And I wasn't necessarily thinking about space, but I even applied to an actuary school one time. But mathematics goes in so many different directions, and you have the opportunity to go in those directions if you really get a good foundation. The second P in that is to plan what you have to get to a job like that. And with my having geometry and algebra in high school, I knew what my plan had to be. I had to take a whole lot of mathematics because I hadn't had it. And the third P was prepare. Take your plan and work it. And then the fourth P was to persist. So I'm thinking about what Dad said to me, and I had certainly perceived of myself. I have sort of planned that I had to take a lot of math, but I knew my dad was looking out for me. He wanted me to be able to get a job when I finished college. And so I said, well, I'm going to go into teacher education, like my dad suggested, But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of the electives that I earned during my 4 years in college. I'm going to take the higher level math classes that are not required for teacher education, but are required for the regular mathematicians. And so that was my plan for starting out. So by the time I got to my senior year, I had completed most of my teacher education classes. I did my student teaching in math. I did my student teaching in physics, which was my minor. And I took 4 higher level math classes each semester with that. So I graduated with my teacher certificate and 24 hours of higher math classes that were not required for me to graduate. And I went off to teach. And as soon as I went to Brunswick County down on 85, going down 85, some of the teachers came up to me and said, well, you know, they give in-service classes at Virginia State College in Petersburg, free to teachers in the system. And so we drive up there on weekend and take a class. We wanted to know if you're interested in going with us. And I said, sure, I'd really like to do that. And so we went up and I registered for the class. And it was another higher level math class. The head of the mathematics department was the instructor. And so I went through that year and did very well in that class, enjoyed it. 2 or 3 years later, I had married and I was living in Tidewater, Virginia, which was about 80 miles from Petersburg. And I went to the teachers in Portsmouth and asked, would any of you be interested in going to Virginia State to take an in-service class? And finally got a carload of people to drive up there. And so the carload went up the first semester. We registered for our classes, and the first semester went very well. The second semester, every one of the people in the car quit. This class was on Friday night. So it meant after working all day, you had to drive 80 miles to Petersburg, sit in a class for 3 hours, then come home about 10:30 at night. And I puzzled over that. I said, you know, I really don't want to be doing that drive by myself, but I also don't want to quit. I want to keep going. So I did. And some nights when I drove home on Friday night, I was really tired. I had my head out the window. I was slapping myself. I was doing anything I could to keep from falling asleep. But I was glad I did that. My husband had gone to Virginia State College, and he got a fellowship to go there and work on a master's degree in biology. And so the next time I went for the class, I went to the professor, and I said, you know, it looks like we're going to be moving here next year, and I'm wondering if you know of any jobs around here that I might apply for. And he says, oh, you thinking about moving here? I said, yes. He said, well, let me take you across the hall and introduce you to Dr. Hodkinson, who is the head of the physics department. He's looking for a research assistant in aerosol physics, which is the study of the particles in the atmosphere. We went over, we talked to Dr. Hodkinson, and before I left the room that night, I had that research assistantship. And that was wonderful. I was going to do research in light scattering of non-spherical particles, but I was going to also get enough pay for that position that I could pay to get my own master's degree. And by this time, I had no qualms. It was the connection between the mathematics and the physical world that really was my passion. And I used to get upset with some of my math teachers because they'd show us how to do the problems, but they would never tell us how the equations were used in the real world. And that's what I wanted to know. And in fact, as I was teaching, that's what students would ask me. High school students would say, why do I need to know this? College students would say, why do I have to learn this? You know. So I think knowing how those equations are used and how they impact our physical world is very, very important. So anyway, I signed up to get my master's degree in applied mathematics. And for 2 years, I worked on that. And as I was getting ready to graduate, I applied to a couple of colleges, to Hampton Institute and Norfolk State, in fact. But then I said, well, let me go by the placement office here and see if they've got some jobs I might look into. And so I went to the placement office. I met the young lady. I told her who I was and what I was looking for. She said, where in the world have you been? NASA was here yesterday recruiting. She says, you fill out this application, bring it back to me, and I'm going to mail it in. I did that. She mailed it in, and 3 weeks later, I had an offer from NASA. And so that was wonderful. So in the 27th of June, 1967, I went to work at NASA. That was 2 years before we walked on the moon. And thank you, thank you. And so I did not realize I was being hired as a computer, but but that's what I was. I was assigned to the reentry physics branch. The West computers were segregated until Sputnik went up. And then Sputnik, there was a lot of pressure in this country, of course, once Sputnik went up. I keep thinking there's a screen back there. There was a lot of pressure to consolidate the aeronautical research in this country and have some space research in this country. And so the NACA centers, which is what they were before, which was all aeronautics, were combined, and we came up with NASA on October the 1st, 1958. And so the segregation on the base went away. I think the segregation had been because of Virginia laws before that. And so I went into the reentry physics branch, which was the branch that did the calculations for how the spaceships would re-enter the atmosphere of the Earth. And we particularly cared for how fast the vehicle was going, because that would determine how hot the vehicle would get. So you had to know that your vehicle could withstand the temperatures that they encountered. You also wanted to know the angle that the vehicle should go into the atmosphere. You didn't want it to bounce back out into space. You wanted it to, not like going in a swimming pool, to go in nice and easy into the atmosphere. And, but all of the calculations for the Apollo program had been done before I got there. They had, in fact, had the first Apollo accident at Kennedy Space Center that January, just before I came. And so I worked in that area. I worked in the hypersonic flow area. And supersonic, for some of you who might not understand, supersonic means flying faster than the speed of sound. And at sea level, that's 750 miles an hour. Hypersonic means even faster than that, and it's generally greater than Mach 5. Mach means 5 times the speed of sound, and anything faster than that would be hypersonic speeds. And those are the speeds that we encounter out in space and coming back into the atmosphere. And so that was the area that I was working in. I did calculations for some of the wind tunnels and things there. And then and engineers were bringing in equations for me to solve. I didn't use the machine and big spreadsheets very much for filling out the sheets, but because I had learned to program in graduate school. And I said, the equations that they're bringing over are so very much like the equations that I worked on in graduate school. I said, but I guess that's because they're engineers and I'm a mathematician. And somebody said to me, well, there are a few of those men over there that have math degrees. I says, oh, well, that's where I want to be. So I went to my supervisor and asked about transferring to the engineering section. And he said, no, I don't think that's possible. So I waited a few weeks, and then I said, you know, I'm going to have to do something here. And so I said, I'm going to a higher level up. I'm going up to a director, about 3 levels up. So I went over to the director, and I said, I'd just like to ask you a question. I said, I'd like to know why a male and a female coming here with the same background are assigned to such different jobs. I said, the females are put into computer pools. They do what the engineer tells them to do. They don't give talks. They don't write papers. They don't get their names on papers. And papers is what helps you get promoted, so they don't get promoted. Whereas the males are asked to do a research area, to work in a research area. They give talks on their research. They write papers on their research, and they get promoted. And he looked at me and he says, nobody's ever asked that question before. I said, well, I'm asking it now. And we said a few other words. He made a comment about how many of the women, especially, marry the engineers and then leave the workforce, which it's always brought up. But anyway, I left and went back to my office, and in 3 weeks, I got promoted. I had been there 5 years and had never been promoted. So I got promoted, and I was transferred. And that was 1972. In the late 60s, the United States, the English and the French and the Russians were all planning to build a commercial supersonic transport. Commercial meaning an airplane you could buy a ticket for and fly in. And so the United States, as part of their plan to do a commercial supersonic transport, did a lot of supersonic flights across Chicago and Oklahoma City. Because they found out in 1947, when we had the first successful supersonic flight, that there's this noise that accompanies a supersonic flight called a sonic boom. And so doing the test flights over Chicago and Oklahoma City, they had huge banks of people answering phones. And the people living there were calling about their cracked sheetrock, their cracked front windows, their cracked china, and things like that. The United States then canceled their SST program. We couldn't even say the word SST. And not only did they cancel their SST program, they passed a law that said there could be no commercial supersonic flight over the continental United States. That law is still on the books today. The other countries around the world also did a similar thing in Europe and on further around the east. So there weren't very many places for a supersonic airplane to fly. But the English and the French finished their supersonic transport, and it was called the Concorde. The Russians finished theirs. It was called the Tu-144. The Concorde started flying in 1976. It flew up until about 13 or 14 years ago. And everybody would say that that was technically a beautiful airplane. It was great. But economically, it was a failure. They only built 14 of them. They didn't have anywhere to fly them. It was across the ocean from London and Paris to New York and Washington. And so, and I think I called about the ticket price back in the 70s, and it was $1,400, I think, to go across the ocean in the Concorde. And so it was successful technically, but not economically because of where the flying could be. The Russians, their airplane caught fire at an air show in Paris, and they took it back to Russia. They never used it as a commercial airplane. They used it as a cargo airplane within Russia itself. We rented it 1 year to do some supersonic flight tests on the Tu-144. I think this was after their economy had gone south, and Al Gore was trying to come up with some program with the Russians that we could work with. And so I did work on that program with them, but I didn't get to Russia in doing that. And so NASA had said, well, you know what? People like to go fast, and they would, really love to be able to get across the United States in less than 5 hours, and so forth and so on. So we need to start a research program on, can we reduce that sonic boom that we have? And so this is a sonic boom, and when I talk to students especially, I will explain to them what a sonic boom is like this. There's an air pressure in this room, and that is the pressure on your ears as you sit there. If I blow up a balloon, I'm putting more molecules into the balloon, and it gets bigger. The air pressure in the balloon gets higher than the air pressure in the room. So if I stick a pin into the balloon, it sets up a shock wave that goes out in all directions at the speed of sound. And when that shock wave hits your ear, the pressure on your ear jumps instantaneously from what it was originally to what it was in the balloon. And that is the balloon pop that you hear. So when you have an airplane like this, going faster than the speed of sound, all of the disturbances it creates is pushing molecules out of the way. We've got some shocks coming off the tail and the engines and so forth. All of those disturbances move at the speed of sound. And so all of the disturbances generated by that airplane are within that cone on that airplane. If that airplane is at 50,000 feet in the atmosphere, the base down there where the cone intersects the ground, that's the dark green part, that could be up to 50 miles wide. So it's pretty wide. So if you are standing just in front of that dark green area, you hear nothing. But as soon as that airplane moves a little bit forward, it drags that cone over you, and you are now in the cone itself, and you hear the sonic boom because you again get the jump in pressure from the normal atmospheric pressure to the pressure that's inside that cone. And that's a sonic boom. And sometimes they are really pretty loud, and of course if you're inside a house, it vibrates on your house and everything. You hear all of that. And so that is the problem we face. So I move into my new job, and the first thing my supervisor does is give me a technical paper from Cornell University, where a couple of professors there had the idea that you might be able to design that airplane differently and reduce the sonic boom. The top curve on this chart is the equivalent area of your typical military supersonic airplane. And it reaches a maximum area before you get to the back part of that curve. The equivalent area is if you had the axis of the airplane laying out, you would cut it along the axis and calculate the area at each point that you have cut it. That is what you plot there against the actual distance. The other thing we're interested in is what is the happening over the wings. The wing surface is curved, and as the air is flowing across the upper surface, the curves cause the air to go faster over the top of the wing than it does over the bottom of the wing. And the pressure goes down with the faster air over the wing. And so now you have a higher pressure under the wing and a lower pressure on top of the wing. The resultant force is up. That's called the lift of the airplane. That's what holds it up. The total lift of that airplane has to match the weight of the airplane. So now the equations that I had to take and manipulate and solve and write a computer program for, I would be able to input the Mach number, and again, the Mach number is the speed of the airplane. Mach 1 is the speed of sound. That's somebody's name who discovered the importance of the speed of sound in the fluid flow. So we would give it the Mach number of the airplane, the length, the weight of the airplane, and the altitude of the airplane. And what would be the output of the computer code would be the equivalent area distribution on the bottom. And one of the striking differences there is to see that it reaches its maximum area at the tail end of that airplane. And so once the code was running and everything, we started to design airplanes. I'm working with one other engineer then, and we put in our inputs, we get our outputs. First plane I designed looked like the top curve. But then I had to say, okay, once we got the curve, my airplane design, I had to generate the lift and the cross-sectional areas, take that equivalent area distribution and compare it to where I'm trying to go, which is the bottom curve. So it was an iterative process that took us a long time to do. Where do I change my design? And once I change it, I had to go through the other calculations and compare it to where I was trying to go. So I don't remember exactly how long it took us. Could have been 4 or 5 months. I don't recall. But you see that there are two curves on the lower. There are two curves. There's a dashed curve and a solid curve. So we actually matched that curve. So this is one of the airplanes that came out of our design work. This has a wing which is a little more exotic, that has some curvature in it. This is a second wing model that was designed. This one was Mach 2, and its wing was perfectly smooth. And so once we got these wings designed, we sent them off to the shop builders to build the wings. They cost about $6,000 or $7,000. This is built out of stainless steel, but it had to be perfect. The thicknesses had to match what we were designing. All of the linear dimensions and everything had to match that. And once we had the models back, we mounted them in our supersonic wind tunnel at NASA Langley. Okay, the wind tunnel, of course, is a way that we usually start testing airplanes. It's a lot cheaper to build a $7,000 model, put it in a tube around your building, have a compressor blow the air past the airplane at the speed you're testing, which is what we do in the supersonic wind tunnel. Otherwise, you'd have to build a full-scale airplane, engines and all, fly it through the air and measure it, and you're spending millions of dollars to do that. And so a lot of the beginning work on airplanes is done in wind tunnels. And lots of students you see building wind tunnels in science fairs and measuring things there. And so we tested these models in the wind tunnel. We also tested a baseline, which would be a straight delta wing like one of the military airplanes, to see what kind of signature we would get here. The yellow part in the middle of the tunnel there allows that plane to move forward just a little bit. When the air is blowing in the tunnel and that airplane moves a little forward, that cone that was going over that was on the nose of the airplane that we saw earlier would actually be covering that pressure probe beside the airplane there. And so now that pressure probe would be reading the pressure inside that cone. There's a second pressure probe on this shot slot that you can hardly see at the top of that black area, which is measuring the pressure in the wind tunnel that's outside of the cone. And so you're getting, when you compare the two readings, you're getting the change in the pressures there, which again is the loudness of the boom that you would hear, that instantaneous change in pressure. We did all of our tests and everything. We got, for the baseline, the delta wing that was like a military airplane, we got some big pressure differences in those two. For the designs that we did, we got a much smaller area difference, and we did not get a lot of growth after we got the initial shock. So we said, this looks promising. So we spent many years actually doing the designs. By this time, Boeing was working with us. We were working with McDonnell Douglas in doing these designs and things. And in around 2002, we Boeing said, we said this theory works. We can change the loudness of the sonic boom with the design of the airplane. They said, well, we can't just go by what we're getting out of the wind tunnel. We need to do a flight test. So we borrowed 2 F-5 supersonic airplanes from the Air Force. And we put panels on the sides of that airplane, or one of those airplanes, to make the equivalent area distribution of that airplane match that target equivalent area distribution. And that's the one in the upper left corner. We flew those in the Mojave Desert in California, and the bottom camouflaged airplane there is the other F-5. It had no changes to it. The one in the middle is this sonic boom demonstrator, and the top airplane there, I think, is an F-15 that had a pressure probe on the nose measuring the shocks off of the other 2. So when you do flight tests like this, you try to measure the signatures all the way to the ground so that you see how they're changing as they are going to the ground. Well, the day this flight was done, I wasn't in California, but a friend called me who was in the control room, and you could hear the shouts of the people in the control room, just like if you saw the movie Hidden Figures, the shouts when John Glenn came back safely from orbiting the Earth, because it worked. There was a big N wave from that camouflaged airplane, and there was a much smaller wave from the one in the middle there. And you can see kind of the symbols of what those waves look like drawn on the side of the airplane there. So that airplane looks like a porpoise. So most supersonic airplanes won't look like that. And so the next step, we said, has to be that we need to have a designer integrate the features of an efficient, good supersonic airplane with the features of a low boom plane. And in 2017, 15 years later, NASA got money in their budget to do this. And so Lockheed Martin, out in Palmdale, California, designed this supersonic Quest plane, QSST. And you can see it's very long. It's got a very long nose on it, and it's very slender. And they actually have to have some kind of visioning system in there because the pilot can't see over that nose. So they actually have to have a way for him to see within the cockpit itself. But in March of this year, NASA signed a $247 million contract with Lockheed Martin to build this airplane. And it's going to take them about 3 years to build it. They are, then once it's built in 2021, they will carry it through its supersonic maneuvers to see if it's a good supersonic airplane. Handles well, and all is well with the airplane. They will take it through its low speed characteristics. Can the pilot handle it well as it's taking off and if it's landing? And then they will fly it over people like you. And they will get you to answer questions about the noise that you hear. I understand it's going to be more like a thump. I have not heard it. But we would get you to say, could you live with your United and American and Delta Airlines having a few supersonic airplanes flying across the United States? And NASA will take that data to the FAA and ask them to consider a rule change. They will also, if it's positive, especially work with the noise regulation people in the other countries to try to get the rule changed around the world. If that were to come true, then of course you could probably fly from here to California in maybe 3 hours instead of the 5 that it usually takes us. And so this is a continuation of the work that I worked on, but it's been a lot of years. I worked on it for 25 years. Thank you. Thank you. And so after we did our flight test and our funding kind of dried up, I went into a career development program, I guess, at NASA, and I spent the last about 10 years there in the senior staff at NASA. I headed the Education Public Affairs Office. I was the Assistant Director for Strategic Planning, and I headed one of the technical offices where the programs were led at the other centers, but we performed some of the work at Langley. So that was computational fluid dynamics, it was engine work, it was air traffic management, and a couple of other areas there. And so I had a great career at NASA, and I also have said that I have really enjoyed speaking to the young people around the country over the last 2 years. They all say they're inspired, and I'm hoping that they are inspired and that they will stay inspired. I told them, I think, the Silicon Valley says they can't find people to put in jobs. I said, you can't tell me that they have to go to India or to the Far East to find people. If our young people were taking the right classes and working hard, then they could do those jobs and get hired. So I think that, do you want to take questions, or am I? If there's.
Thank you. My father flew from London to New York back in 1978 by a Concorde.
Wonderful.
So is this a similar thing? Is it coming back? Is the Concorde coming back? Or
well, the Concorde.
How does it compare to the Concorde plane?
Well, it's a different airplane. Concorde generated a pretty big sonic boom. Okay. That's why it couldn't fly over land. This airplane, we are hoping, will be soft enough that people will say it can fly over land. That would be the difference there. There are several companies building new supersonic airplanes this year, but the Concorde stopped flying a number of years ago.
The cost of production, for this flight, is it comparable? I understand that the cost of the Concorde is a big factor in its failure as well.
Well, the cost, and once the builders start building an airplane, there is a production cost. Well, they make that back because they sell thousands of airplanes, and that is part of what enables them to recoup their production cost, their development cost, and still make money and everything. Well, the Concorde only made 14 airplanes. So they were getting money from France and England to actually keep operating. And plus, the people who were riding that airplane were paying a pretty high premium also. Some of the studies that we did during the life of the program there at Langley was to actually look at, could an airplane be economically feasible if it could only fly on water? So we went through studies like that. We even looked at, if it were sending shocks into the water, what would it do to the sea life that was in the water? So that would have to have been done with the environmental folks. And so we looked at all of the different areas and decided that it just needed more routes so that your other airlines would buy these airplanes, and so you could be economically feasible because enough companies were buying the airplanes. You're welcome. Thank you. One more?
I just had a question about where would it be flying in the troposphere or would it be flying in the stratosphere? Because there was some concern about the ozone level, ozone layer in the stratosphere with these supersonic transports.
We haven't heard as much about the ozone as we did initially, but 50,000 feet is generally the level of altitude that we hear about now. But so I don't know exactly what the altitude would be. Or, you know, sometimes they're talking about flying even lower than that.
Okay.
So it might vary. And I'm sure this one has a design altitude, but I don't know what it is.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. I should leave this up here.
So I just wanted to pick up a couple of things that Dr. Darden said. One was she was curious. Two, she was incredibly persistent and didn't take no for an answer. And three, she was vocal about what she wanted to do. So I think for all of the students that are here in the audience, and really for all of us, lessons to be learned, right? And I think a lot of us have been in some situations similar to that, but it was inspiring. I hope the students have a chance to speak with you a little bit, if you can stay for a while. And thank all of you for being here, and the showcase opens now, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody in the exhibit hall. Thank you.